I never told my daughter about the $65,000 that deposits into my account every single month. To Harper, I am just her dad, the old man living in a drafty wooden cabin on the edge of town wearing boots that have seen more mud than pavement. She thinks I survive on a meager pension and the vegetables I grow in my garden. She has no idea that the logistics empire I built from a single delivery truck decades ago still pays me a fortune in dividends, even after I stepped down from the board. I preferred it that way. Money changes people, and I wanted to know my daughter loved me for who I was, not what I could buy her. But then came Brody, my son-in-law, a man who measures a person's worth by the brand of their watch. When he invited me to dinner to meet his parents at the most expensive restaurant in Chicago, I knew it wasn't out of kindness. I wanted to see exactly who these people were, so I decided to play the part they expected. I dressed in my oldest denim jacket, the one with the frayed collar, and put on my work boots. I wanted to see how they would treat a ruined, naive old man. I expected rudeness. I expected arrogance. But as soon as I walked through those glass doors, I realized I had walked into something far more sinister than simple snobbery. What happened that night didn't just break my heart, it started a war. Before I tell you how I brought their fake empire crumbling down, please like this video and subscribe to the channel if you have ever had to stand your ground against people who thought they were better than you. And let me know in the comments where you are listening from. I want to see how far this story travels. The Gilded Fork is the kind of place where the air smells like truffles and old money. The lighting is dim, the tablecloths are thicker than my bedsheets, and the silence is heavy, broken only by the polite clinking of silver against china. I stuck out like a sore thumb. As I pushed through the heavy revolving door, I saw the hostess's eyes dart immediately to my boots. They were clean, mind you, but they were work boots. Heavy leather scarred from years of use with a little bit of dried mud caught in the treads from my walk to the train station. She stepped in front of me, her smile tight, and practiced blocking my path with a clipboard. "Can I help you, sir?" she asked, her tone suggesting that I was definitely in the wrong place. "The delivery entrance is actually around the back through the alley." "I'm not here for a delivery, ma'am," I said, keeping my voice low and humble. "I'm here for dinner. My daughter is waiting for me. The table is under the name Brody." She looked at her list, then back at me, her eyebrows arching in disbelief. She hesitated for a long moment, clearly debating whether to call security or let me pass. Finally, she let out a small, sharp sigh through her nose and gestured for me to follow. She didn't walk me to the table so much as she marched me there, keeping a distance as if poverty might be contagious. We walked past tables of businessmen in Italian suits and women dripping in diamonds. I felt their eyes on me. I saw the whispers behind hands. I kept my head down, playing the part of the embarrassed old country bumpkin, but my eyes were scanning everything. I saw Harper first. She was sitting near the window looking nervous. She was twisting her napkin in her hands, her knuckles white. When she saw me, her face lit up with a mixture of relief and panic. She half rose from her chair, waving a little too frantically. But sitting across from her was Brody, my son-in-law. He didn't stand up. He didn't even turn his head. He just stared at his phone, scrolling with an air of boredom that made my hands itch. When Harper said, "Dad is here," he finally looked up. His eyes narrowed as they swept over my denim jacket and my flannel shirt. He didn't offer a smile. He didn't offer a hand. He just let out a groan that was loud enough for the table next to us to hear. Harper rushed over to hug me. She smelled like anxiety and cheap perfume trying too hard to fit into this world. I squeezed her tight. "I'm so glad you came, Dad," she whispered, but I could feel the tension in her frame. I pulled back and looked at Brody. "Good evening, Brody," I said, extending my hand. He looked at my hand like it was covered in grease. He didn't take it. Instead, he picked up his water glass and took a slow sip, making me stand there with my hand hanging in the air. "You wore that?" Brody asked, his voice dripping with disdain. "This is a 5-star restaurant, Bernard, not a truck stop diner. It's my best jacket." I lied, forcing a sheepish smile. I ironed the shirt myself. Brody rolled his eyes and leaned in close to Harper, whispering in a hiss that I was absolutely meant to hear. I told you to tell him to dress appropriately. My parents are going to be here any minute. They are upper-class, Harper. They are used to a certain standard. This is embarrassing. Harper flinched. I'm sorry, Brody. I didn't think he would. Just sit down. Bernard, Brody snapped, cutting her off. Try not to touch anything too expensive. I sat. I pulled the heavy chair in, conscious of the squeak my boots made on the polished floor. I kept my face neutral, the picture of a chastised old man, but inside my mind was racing. I had built a logistics network that spanned 3 continents. I had negotiated deals with CEOs who could buy and sell Brody 100 times over. I knew how to spot a man who was insecure, and Brody reeked of it. But I needed to see the rest of the players. 10 minutes later they arrived. Richard and Meredith, Brody's parents, or as he liked to call them, the dynasty. They made an entrance that was designed to turn heads. Richard was a large man wearing a suit that was a little too shiny and a gold watch that was a little too big. Meredith was draped in furs despite it being a mild autumn evening, and her fingers were heavy with rings. To the untrained eye, they looked like royalty. But I have been collecting antiques and studying people for 40 years. I know the difference between old money and debt dressed up as wealth. Richard walked with a swagger, booming a hello to the maitre d', who clearly didn't know who he was. Meredith was clutching a designer handbag like a shield. When they reached our table, the performance began. Mom, Dad, Brody said, jumping up like an eager puppy. You look fantastic. Richard clapped his son on the back. Good to see you, son. Keeping the empire running, trying to, Dad. Trying to. Then they turned their attention to me. The silence that followed lasted only a second, but it felt like an hour. Richard looked me up and down, his lip curling slightly. And this must be Harper's father, Meredith said, her voice high and tight. Yes, I'm Bernard, I said, standing up again to offer my hand to Richard. Richard looked at my hand, then looked at Brody, then looked back at me. He gave a short, dry chuckle and kept his hands firmly in his pockets. Richard, he said, we're going to skip the handshake if you don't mind. We just came from a sanitizing spa treatment. Can't be too careful these days with germs. I slowly lowered my hand. Of course, I mumbled. Wouldn't want to get you dirty. Meredith didn't even look at me. She pulled a silk handkerchief from her bag and made a show of wiping down the leather chair next to mine before she sat. She sat on the very edge of the seat, angling her body away from me, as if I emitted a foul odor. So, Bernard, Richard said as he snapped his fingers for a waiter. Brody tells us you're retired. What did you do? Janitorial work, construction? I decided to feed their ego. I leaned forward, resting my rough elbows on the table. Oh, a bit of this and that, I said, my voice raspy. I drove trucks for a while, moved some boxes. Just simple work. Hard work. But it paid the bills for a time. Meredith let out a tiny, pitying laugh. How quaint. We believe in working smart, not hard. Richard here has been in investment banking and real estate development for 30 years. Is that so? I asked, widening my eyes in mock amazement. That sounds very impressive. It is, Richard said, puffing out his chest. We're currently developing a luxury resort in the Maldives, and we just closed a deal on a commercial complex in downtown Manhattan. Millions involved. Complicated stuff. You wouldn't understand the intricacies of liquidity and asset management. I nodded slowly. No, I suppose I wouldn't. I just know that if you spend more than you have, you're in trouble. Brody snorted. That's a poverty mindset, Bernard. You have to spend money to make money. That's what my dad taught me. That's why we drive Bentleys and you take the bus. I glanced at Harper. She was staring at her empty plate, her face burning red. She looked small. My daughter, who used to climb apple trees and run track, looked like she was shrinking by the second. Harper, dear, Meredith said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. I noticed your nails. You really should go to my salon. A woman in your position married to a man like Brody needs to maintain a certain standard. You can't let yourself go just because of your background. It's not her background, Mom, Brody said, cutting a piece of bread aggressively. It's her attitude. I tell her all the time. She needs to stop thinking like a peasant. She's always worried about the bills. Can we afford this, Brody? Should we save that, Brody? It's exhausting. Richard nodded sagely. It's hard to break those lower-class habits. It takes generations. I gripped my fork under the table. They weren't just insulting me anymore. They were dismantling my daughter. Harper manages the household budget. I said, my voice steady. That's a responsible thing to do. Responsible, Meredith laughed. It's tedious, Harper. You really need to learn from Brody. He has the vision. You're holding him back, aren't you? And looking at your father, I can see where it comes from. Poor thing. It must be genetic. I saw a tear slide down Harper's cheek. She quickly wiped it away, terrified Brody would see. The dinner continued like this for 2 hours. They ordered the most expensive items on the menu without even looking at the descriptions. Caviar, Wagyu beef, bottles of wine that cost more than the car I drove in the 80s. They ate loudly, talking over each other, bragging about trips to Europe I was fairly certain they hadn't taken, and investments that sounded like buzzwords strung together by someone who watches too much television. I sat there eating my soup, observing. I noticed things. I noticed that Richard's gold watch had a ticking second hand, a dead giveaway for a quartz movement, not the automatic sweep of a real Rolex. I noticed that Meredith's diamond ring didn't catch the light with the fire of a real stone. It looked dull, like cubic zirconia. And I noticed the way Brody kept checking his phone under the table, sweating every time the waiter brought another bottle of wine. These weren't rich people. I had dealt with rich people my whole life. Rich people don't try this hard. These were grifters. Then came the bill. The waiter placed the black leather folder in the center of the table. The silence that fell was immediate. The total I estimated had to be over $1,000. Richard patted his pockets. He frowned. He patted his chest pocket. Then he let out a dramatic sigh. Oh, for heaven's sake, he boomed. What is it? Dad, Brody asked, his voice tightening. I left my wallet in the Bentley, Richard said, shaking his head. The valet has it. I can't believe this. Meredith. Do you have your purse? I didn't bring my wallet inside, Richard. Meredith said, looking offended. It ruins the line of my dress. I thought you were handling this. Brody looked at his parents, then at the check. The sweat on his forehead was visible now. It's fine, Brody said, his voice cracking slightly. I've got it. It's my treat. He reached for the folder. He opened it and stared at the number. I saw his throat bob as he swallowed. $1,200, he muttered. He pulled out a sleek black credit card. He handed it to the waiter with a trembling hand. Keep the change, he said, trying to sound confident. The waiter nodded and walked away. The table fell into an awkward silence. Richard went back to talking about his imaginary golf game with the mayor, but Brody was staring at the waiter station. 2 minutes later, the waiter returned. He wasn't smiling anymore. He leaned down to Brody, speaking softly, but in the quiet restaurant, it was audible enough. I'm sorry, sir. The card was declined. Brody turned beet red. Try it again. It's a platinum card. There's a mistake. I tried it 3 times, sir, the waiter said, his voice firm. It's declined. Do you have another form of payment? Brody frantically dug through his wallet. He pulled out another card. Try this one. The waiter walked away. Richard cleared his throat. Banks these days, am I right? Always freezing accounts for security checks when you're moving big money around. Right, Dad, Brody said, wiping his forehead with a napkin. Just a security check. The waiter came back. Declined, sir. The heir left the table. Brody looked at Harper. His eyes were wide and desperate, and then instantly they turned furious. Harper, give me your card, he snapped. I don't have it on me, Brody, she whispered. You told me to leave it at home so I wouldn't spend anything. You useless woman, he shouted. He actually shouted. Heads turned at the nearby tables. You bring nothing to this table. I pay for everything I carry. This whole family, and the one time I need you to handle a simple logistics issue, you fail. He was making a scene. He was humiliating her to cover his own failure. I realized it was time for my cue. I slowly reached into the pocket of my denim jacket. I pulled out a small frayed canvas pouch. I undid the string and dumped the contents onto the pristine white tablecloth. A pile of crumpled $1 bills, a few fives, and a handful of quarters and dimes spilled out. It looked like the contents of a child's piggy bank. I can help, I said, my voice shaking with feigned nervousness. I have some savings here. I was going to use it for the bus and maybe some groceries, but family is family, right? I started smoothing out the wrinkled dollar bills, counting them out loud. 1, 2, 3. Meredith gasped. Oh my God, she said, covering her mouth. This is mortifying. She pulled out her phone. She didn't call for help. She opened the camera app. She pointed it at me. I have to record this, she sneered. Everyone needs to see this. This is what we have to deal with. Look at him, counting pennies at a 5-star restaurant. This is the trash my son married into. I kept counting. $4. $4.25. Brody stared at the pile of dirty money on the table. The shame on his face turned into pure, unadulterated rage. He didn't see a father trying to help. He saw a mirror reflecting his own impotence. Stop it, Brody screamed. He reached out and swept his arm across the table. The coins scattered. The crumpled bills flew into the air, drifting down onto the floor like dead leaves. I don't want your garbage money, old man, Brody yelled, standing up. You think this helps? This is pathetic. You are pathetic. He grabbed Harper by the arm, digging his fingers in hard enough to make her wince. We are leaving, he hissed. But the bill, sir, the waiter said, stepping forward, signaling to a security guard near the door. My father will handle it, Brody spat, pointing at Richard. Richard stood up, looking suddenly very pale. Actually, I need to go check the car. They scrambled. It was a chaotic, undignified retreat. Brody dragging Harper, Richard, and Meredith power-walking toward the door, ignoring the shouts of the manager. They left me sitting there, surrounded by scattered coins and crumpled bills, the center of attention of the entire restaurant. I sat still for a moment. I watched them go. I watched my daughter look back at me with tear-filled eyes before she was shoved out the door. I didn't pick up the money. I didn't chase after them. I calmly reached into the inside pocket of my jacket, the one behind the denim. I pulled out a phone. It wasn't the cracked flip phone I used when I visited them. This was a satellite phone, encrypted military grade, the kind I used when I was negotiating shipping lanes in hostile territories. I dialed a number I hadn't used in 2 years. It rang once. Fairbanks. I said, my voice dropping the wavering tremble of the old man. It's Bernard. Mr. Lowe. The voice on the other end answered immediately, sharp and alert. It's been a long time. Is everything all right? No, Fairbanks. Everything is not all right. I looked at the empty chairs where the so-called dynasty had just sat. I want you to run a full financial deep dive on a Richard and Meredith Miller and a Brody Miller. I want to know every debt, every lien, every hidden account. I want to know why my daughter's credit card was declined. And Fairbanks. Yes, sir, start the procedure to unfreeze my active assets. I'm coming out of retirement. I have some trash to take out. I hung up the phone. The waiter was approaching me, looking sympathetic, probably about to tell me I could wash dishes to pay the bill. I reached into my back pocket and pulled out a money clip holding a stack of crisp $100 bills that I had tucked away for this exact moment. I peeled off 15 of them and placed them on the table. "Keep the change," I said to the stunned waiter. I stood up, brushed the crumbs off my denim jacket, and walked out the door. The old man was gone. The CEO was back. And tomorrow, the Miller family was going to learn exactly what happens when you kick a sleeping giant. The drive back to the outskirts of Chicago was a blur of streetlights and simmering rage. I parked my rusted pickup truck in the gravel driveway of the cabin. To the neighbors and to my daughter, this place was a testament to my failure. It was a drafty 600-square-foot box with peeling paint and a porch that sagged on the left side. A relic of a man who couldn't keep up with the modern world. But as I unlocked the front door and stepped into the darkness, the air changed. The smell of old wood and damp earth vanished, replaced by the sterile, crisp scent of conditioned air. I locked the deadbolt, not the cheap one you can buy at a hardware store, but the reinforced steel mechanism hidden inside the frame. I walked to the old bookshelf filled with dusty paperbacks and water-stained almanacs. I pulled the copy of Moby Dick not to read, but to trigger the biometric scanner hidden in the spine. A section of the floorboards, indistinguishable from the rest, slid back with a silent hydraulic hiss. I descended the narrow staircase. The lights flickered on automatically, revealing the truth that lay beneath the floorboards of my poverty. This was not a basement. It was a command center. Monitors lined the walls displaying global shipping routes, stock market fluctuations, and real-time data from the logistics empire I had supposedly left behind. I sat in the ergonomic leather chair, the only piece of luxury I allowed myself, and pulled the satellite phone from my pocket again. I placed it on the desk and switched to the secure landline. Fairbanks picked up on the first ring. He knew better than to make me wait when I called on this line. I didn't waste time with pleasantries. "I need a forensic accounting team on the Miller family immediately," I said, my voice echoing off the concrete walls. "And Fairbanks, I need to know why a platinum credit card belonging to my daughter was declined for a $1,200 dinner. That card should have a limit 10 times that amount. Find out who froze it, why, and where the money went. Do not sleep until I have an answer." I hung up and stared at the screens, watching the data streams, but seeing nothing but the terrified look in Harper's eyes. I was about to pour myself a drink when my personal cell phone, the cheap flip phone everyone knew, buzzed on the desk. It was Harper. I stared at the screen for a second. It was past midnight. Nothing good happens past midnight. "Hello, sweetheart." I answered, softening my voice, forcing the roughness back into my throat to play the part of the tired old man. The sound on the other end broke me. She wasn't just crying, she was hyperventilating. It was a guttural, terrifying sound of someone whose world has just collapsed. "Dad," she choked out. "Dad, I am so sorry. I didn't know what to do. They left me there. They just left me on the sidewalk." I gripped the edge of the desk, my knuckles turning white. "Slow down, Harper. Who left you? Where are you? I'm in an Uber," she sobbed. "I'm coming to your place. I can't go home. I can't go back there, Dad. He locked me out." He changed the codes on the smart lock. My blood ran cold. Brody had locked his wife out of her own home. "Why, Harper? Why would he do that?" "Because I didn't have the money," she wailed. "Dad, I have to tell you something. I have to tell you the truth. I've been lying to you. I'm not managing the budget. I don't have any money." I stayed silent, letting her speak, though every word felt like a physical blow. About 6 months ago, Richard Brody's father, he had this investment opportunity. They said it was a sure thing, a commercial development in Austin. They needed liquid capital immediately to secure the land. Brody said we had to do it. He said it was our ticket to the dynasty he always talks about. But we didn't have the cash. So he made me sign papers, Dad. What papers, Harper? I asked, though I already felt the sickness rising in my gut. The house, she whispered. Mom's house, the one she left me. I took out a second mortgage, a high-interest loan against the equity. I signed it all over to Richard's company. They said they would pay it back in 3 months with interest. But they haven't paid a dime. And now the bank is sending notices. And Brody, tonight he told me that if I don't get another $50,000 from somewhere to cover Richard's margin call, they are going to lose the deal and the house. He said, if I come home without the money, I shouldn't come home at all. The rage that filled me then was not hot. It was absolute zero. They had taken the only thing my late wife had left for our daughter, the home where Harper grew up, and they had gambled it away on a scam. And now they were holding her ransom for $50,000 she didn't have. Come here, Harper, I said, my voice steady as a rock. Come to the cabin. You are safe here. I hung up the phone. I looked at the monitors. I didn't need just a lawyer anymore. I needed a demolition crew. The next 24 hours were a vigil. I didn't sleep. I sat in the leather chair beneath the floorboards, watching the encryption keys on my monitor cycle through sequences, waiting for the green light that meant Fairbanks had cracked the shell companies, protecting the Miller family's secrets. Upstairs, Harper was sleeping the sleep of the emotionally exhausted. I had given her the spare room, the one with the quilt my wife had stitched by hand, and told her to turn off her phone. She needed silence. I needed answers. When the notification finally pinged on the main screen, the sound was like a gunshot in the quiet bunker. It was a single massive file labeled Miller_due_diligence_final. I took a sip of cold coffee, adjusted my glasses, and clicked open the document that would dismantle my son-in-law's life. The first page was a summary, and just reading the executive overview made my stomach turn. I had expected debt. I had expected bad credit. I had not expected a crime scene. Richard and Meredith Miller, the supposed titans of industry, the couple who wiped down chairs before sitting on them, were ghosts. Financially speaking, they didn't exist. They had filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy 5 years ago in Florida, leaving a trail of nearly $4 million in unpaid debts to contractors, caterers, and small business owners. Their current lifestyle in Chicago was a house of cards built on a classic grimy Ponzi scheme. They weren't developing resorts in the Maldives. They were running a shell corporation called Miller Horizon Group that solicited investments from retirees at country clubs. They promised high-yield returns on commercial real estate that didn't exist, used the money from new investors to pay the dividends to the old ones, and skimmed the rest to fund their wardrobe and their dinners at the Gilded Fork. They were 2 bad months away from prison, and they knew it. I scrolled down to the section on Brody. My hands tightened on the armrests. Brody Miller, the man who claimed to be the director of operations for a tech firm. The man who belittled my daughter for her peasant mindset was actually a junior sales associate for a third-tier logistics software company. And he wasn't even a good one. His employment file, which Fairbanks had somehow acquired, showed he was on a performance improvement plan, corporate speak, for you are 1 mistake away from being fired. He hadn't closed a deal in 6 months. But his mediocrity wasn't his biggest sin. His bank statements told a much darker story. It was a chaotic stream of transactions to offshore crypto exchanges and questionable sports betting sites. Thousands of dollars, tens of thousands, gone in minutes. He wasn't investing in the future. He was bleeding money into the digital void. He was a degenerate gambler chasing losses, digging a hole so deep he couldn't see the sky. Then came the part that made me stand up and pace the small concrete room. The forensic accounting of Harper's mortgage. The $50,000 my daughter had extracted from her mother's legacy. The money she thought was securing a prime piece of real estate in Austin. I followed the money trail on the screen. It was a straight line, unhidden and arrogant. The funds hit Brody's account on a Tuesday. On Wednesday, $35,000 was wired to a shell company in Nevis. Fairbanks had flagged this entity. It wasn't an investment firm. It was a collection front for an illegal sports betting syndicate based out of New Jersey. My daughter didn't buy land. She paid off a bookie so her husband wouldn't get his legs broken. And the remaining $15,000. That was the detail that made the bile rise in my throat. It went to Prestige Luxury Rentals. I cross-referenced the date. It was the deposit and 6-month lease payment for a Bentley Continental GT, the same car Richard had claimed he left his wallet in, the same car they used to drive to the restaurant to humiliate me. They had stolen my daughter's home, her security, and her future, not to build an empire but to rent a prop for their delusional theater. They were driving around in my wife's legacy, pretending to be kings while living on stolen time. I thought I had seen enough. I thought I had reached the bottom of the well. But Fairbanks is thorough. At the very end of the report, there was an appendix labeled Future Prospects/Target List. It was a series of emails recovered from Brody's cloud account. He had been communicating with Richard about liquidity options. I opened the last email chain. The subject line was simply, "The Cabin." My eyes scanned the text written by Brody just 3 days ago. "The old man is useless," Brody wrote. "But the land has to be worth something. I checked the zoning. It's sitting on a light industrial overlay. If we can get power of attorney, we can sell it to a developer for maybe 40 or 50 grand. It's peanuts, but it covers the interest on the next loan. We just need to convince Harper he's losing his mind. Put him in a state facility. The cheapest one we can find. He's tough, but he's naive. We can break him." I stared at the words. Put him in a state facility. Cheapest one we can find. We can break him. They weren't just satisfied with draining my daughter dry. They were coming for me next. They looked at my home, my sanctuary, and saw a quick payday to fuel their addiction to appearances. They looked at me, a human being, Harper's father, and saw disposable debris to be swept aside. I turned off the monitor. The darkness of the command center rushed back in, but it wasn't as dark as the thoughts forming in my mind. The anger was gone now. Anger is hot. It burns out. This was something different. This was cold resolve. This was the mindset of a man who enters a boardroom knowing he is going to hostilely take over a company and dismantle it piece by piece. They wanted a naive, ruined old man. They wanted a victim. I would give them exactly what they wanted. I would give them the performance of a lifetime. I picked up the secure phone and dialed Fairbanks again. "Start the paperwork," I said. "I need a deed drawn up for a plot of land in Texas." "Texas, sir?" Fairbanks asked, his voice betraying a hint of confusion. "Yes. I have that old site in the Permian Basin, the one we wrote off 20 years ago because of the toxic runoff issues. The environmental hazard site, sir, that land is worthless. It's a liability. You can't build on it, you can't drill on it. It will cost millions just to clean it up." "Exactly," I said. "Prepare a geological survey. Make it look old. Make it look authentic. And forge a secondary report, something that suggests there is a massive untapped oil reserve sitting right beneath the crust. Make it look like a secret I've been guarding for 40 years. I paused, listening to the hum of the servers. And Fairbanks. "Get me some stage blood. I need to look like I'm dying." I hung up the phone. Upstairs, the sun was beginning to rise, casting long shadows across the yard. I walked to the mirror in the corner of the room. I looked at my face lined with age and weather. I practiced a cough, a weak rattling sound. I slumped my shoulders. If Brody and his parents wanted to break a naive old man to get his last few dollars, I was going to open the door and invite them in. I was going to dangle the carrot of a lifetime in front of their greedy, desperate faces. They wanted my assets. I would give them the most toxic asset in my portfolio, and I would make them pay every last cent they had and every cent they could steal to take it from me. I walked up the stairs, leaving the command center behind. I emerged into the dusty living room of the cabin, the floorboards creaking under my weight. I went to the kitchen and started a pot of coffee. I waited for Harper to wake up. I waited for the phone to ring. I waited for the game to begin. They thought they were the hunters. They had no idea they had just walked into the lion's den. The taste of corn syrup and red food dye is cloying a sickly sweet coating on the tongue that makes you want to gag. I held the small capsule under my tongue, feeling its gelatin shell soften against the heat of my mouth. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror of my rusted truck one last time. I had applied a thin layer of gray foundation to my skin, accentuating the lines around my eyes and mouth, giving my complexion the pallid, waxy sheen of a man whose organs are slowly shutting down. I practiced the tremor in my hand, the slight stoop in my shoulders. It was a performance I had perfected in boardrooms years ago, playing the weak, indecisive old man just before I gutted a rival company. But this time the stakes were higher than stock prices. This was for my daughter. I pulled into the driveway of the house Brody had stolen from Harper. The sight of it made my blood boil, but I forced that anger down, compressing it into a cold, hard stone in my gut. I needed to be pathetic. I needed to be dying. I stepped out of the truck, letting the door creak loudly, and shuffled toward the front porch. I didn't knock with authority this time. I tapped weakly, a scratching sound that barely penetrated the heavy wood. It took a long time for the door to open. When it did, Brody stood there looking disheveled and irritated. He was wearing a silk robe that I knew he hadn't paid for, and his eyes were bloodshot. When he saw me, his lip curled in that familiar sneer. "What do you want, Bernard?" he spat. "I told Harper she isn't welcome back until she brings the cash. If you are here to beg for her, you can save your breath. My parents are inside, and we are dealing with a crisis. We don't have time for your poverty today." I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I let my breath hitch. I grabbed the doorframe as if my legs could no longer support my weight. Then I bit down hard on the capsule. The warm, viscous liquid flooded my mouth. I coughed, a wet, rattling sound that came from deep in my chest, and let the red liquid spray into the handkerchief I held to my lips. I pulled the cloth away, making sure Brody saw the bright crimson stain against the white cotton. Brody's eyes went wide. He took a step back, instinctively recoiling from the sight of sickness. "What the hell?" he muttered, his arrogance faltering for a split second. "I'm dying, Brody." I wheezed, my voice a broken rasp. "The doctors, they say it's the lungs. Years of breathing in dust and diesel fumes. It's finally caught up with me. I don't have much time left. Maybe a week, maybe less." From the hallway behind him, I heard the click of heels. Meredith appeared holding a martini glass, looking annoyed at the draft coming in from the open door. "Who is it, Brody? Close the door." "You're letting the AC out." "It's the old man," Brody said, turning to her, his voice lowered but audible. "He's coughing up blood, Mom. He says he's dying." Meredith stopped. She looked at me, then at the blood-stained handkerchief in my trembling hand. I saw the calculation happen in real time behind her eyes. To them, I wasn't a person in pain. I was a liability. Or if they played their cards right, an opportunity. "Well, don't just leave him on the porch where the neighbors can see," Richard boomed, emerging from the living room. "Bring him inside." Brody hesitated, then grabbed my arm. It wasn't a gentle touch, but it got me over the threshold. They led me to the living room, but they didn't offer me the sofa. Instead, they pointed to a wooden chair in the corner, far away from their white upholstery. I sat down heavily, letting my head loll forward, playing the part of the exhausted, defeated man. "I just wanted to see Harper," I whispered. "I wanted to say goodbye. And I need to settle my affairs. I don't want the state to take what little I have." The room went silent. The word affairs seemed to hang in the air, electric and promising. Richard exchanged a glance with Meredith. It was a subtle, predatory look that I had seen 1,000 times across negotiation tables. The sharks smell blood in the water. Your affairs? Richard asked, his voice suddenly smooth, losing its abrasive edge. He walked over to the sideboard and poured a glass of water, bringing it to me. It was the first act of kindness he had ever shown me, and it was entirely fake. Here, Bernard. Drink this. You should have told us you were ill. We are family after all. I took the glass with shaking hands, spilling a little water on my trousers. Thank you, Richard, I said. I didn't want to be a burden. I know you all think I'm just a poor old truck driver. And I am. I don't have much money in the bank. The pension barely covers the heating bill. Meredith let out a soft breath, her shoulders relaxing. I could see the disappointment. They were hoping for a secret stash of cash. But I continued pausing to cough again, wincing in feigned pain. But I do have the land. Richard froze. What land? It's just an old plot down in Texas, I said, waving my hand dismissively. In the Permian Basin. I bought it 40 years ago for pennies. It's nothing special, just dirt and rocks. I never built on it. I never did anything with it. I was going to leave it to the county, let them turn it into a landfill or something. But now that I'm dying, I thought maybe Harper could sell it. Maybe get a few $1,000s for it. Enough to pay for my funeral so she doesn't have to worry. I saw Brody pull out his phone. He was typing furiously under the table. I knew exactly what he was searching for. Permian Basin. Land value. Oil. Richard sat down on the sofa opposite me, leaning forward, his elbows on his knees. He looked at me with an intensity that was almost comical. Bernard, he said, his voice low and serious. You shouldn't leave that burden to Harper. Selling land is complicated. There are taxes, fees, environmental assessments. Harper is, well, she's not equipped for that kind of business. She's emotional, especially now. I nodded slowly, looking down at my boots. I know. She's a good girl, but she doesn't know about business. I just don't know what else to do. I don't have a will. I don't have a lawyer. I'm just an old man running out of time. Meredith chimed in, her voice dripping with artificial sympathy. Oh, Bernard, that is just tragic. But you know we could help. We have connections. We understand real estate. Brody looked up from his phone. His eyes were wide. I could practically see the dollar signs spinning in his pupils. Dad, he said, his voice tight with excitement. The Permian Basin. That's oil country. Even a small plot there. If the mineral rights are intact. Richard shot him a sharp look, silencing him instantly. He turned back to me, smiling that oily used car salesman smile. Bernard, listen to me. You need to focus on your health. You shouldn't be worrying about legal paperwork in your final days. Why don't you let us handle this? Brody is your son-in-law. He's family. He can take power of attorney. He can manage the asset for you, make sure Harper gets whatever it's worth. I looked at them, letting my eyes wander from face to face. I saw greed. Pure, unadulterated greed. They didn't care if I died right there in the chair. They only cared about the potential lottery ticket I had just dangled in front of them. I don't know, I murmured. It seems like a lot of trouble for a piece of scrubland. I have this old geological survey somewhere. It said something about difficult terrain. Do you have the survey? Richard asked, leaning in closer. I patted the breast pocket of my jacket. I think I brought it. I wanted to show Harper. It's old, though, probably out of date. I pulled out the folded yellowed paper Fairbanks had aged with tea and heat lamps. It looked authentic, smelling of old paper and dust. I handed it to Richard. He snatched it from my hand, unfolding it greedily. Brody leaned over his shoulder. I watched their eyes scan the document. I knew what they were seeing. They were ignoring the warnings about soil instability and toxic runoff. Their eyes were glued to the forged addendum, the one stamped with a confidential seal hinting at significant seismic indicators of a deep earth petroleum reservoir. Richard looked up at me. His hands were trembling, not with age, but with avarice. "Bernard," he said, his voice thick, "you really have no idea what you have here, do you?" "Is it bad?" I asked innocently. "Is it worthless?" "No," Richard said quickly, folding the paper and sliding it into his own pocket. "It's not worthless. It might take some work, a lot of capital investment to make it viable, but we are willing to take that risk for the family, for Harper." He stood up and walked over to me, placing a hand on my shoulder. It felt heavy and cold. "Here is what we are going to do, Bernard. You are going to sign the deed over to Brody. We will handle the sale, the taxes, everything. And in exchange, we will make sure Harper is taken care of. We will pay off her debts. We will even pay for your medical care. You can go to a nice facility. Be comfortable." I looked up at him, letting a single tear leak out of my eye. "You would do that? You would help me?" "Of course," Meredith cooed. "That's what family does." I let out a shuddering breath. Okay, if you think it's best. But I need to know Harper is safe. I need to know the house is safe." "Don't worry about the house," Richard said, grinning. "Once we develop this, once we handle this land, we'll be able to buy 10 houses. Just sign the papers, Bernard. Let us take care of you." I nodded weakly. "All right. But I need to rest. I'm so tired." "We'll call our lawyer," Richard said, pulling out his phone. "We'll get the papers drawn up tonight. You just rest right there, Bernard. Don't move a muscle." I slumped back in the chair, closing my eyes. I listened to them whispering in the kitchen, their voices frantic and excited. They thought they had just struck gold. They thought they were taking candy from a dying baby. They had no idea they were signing their own death warrants. The trap was set, and they had walked right into it, mouth wide open. I pulled the folded papers from my inner pocket with a trembling hand. The deed was yellowed at the edges, the paper soft and fragile, smelling of the cedar box Fairbanks had stored it in for decades. But tucked inside, barely visible, was the bait. The geological survey report. It wasn't just any report. Fairbanks had outdone himself. The paper was heavy, the letterhead embossed with the logo of a defunct but legendary Texas oil exploration firm from the 80s. Stamped across the front in faded red ink were the words, "Confidential Seismic Data." I laid the deed on the coffee table, letting my hand shake just enough so that the survey slipped out and fluttered to the floor. I made a show of ignoring it, focusing my watery eyes on Richard. "This is the deed," I wheezed, tapping the paper. "It is all I have left. I bought it in '72, just scrub land and rocks, but it is paid for. The taxes are low. Maybe you can get a few thousand for it." Brody was the first to move. He didn't lunge, but he shifted in his chair, his eyes darting to the paper on the floor. He leaned down casual as a snake and picked it up. "You dropped this, Bernard," he said, his voice tight. "Oh, that," I waved a dismissive hand. "Just some old report they sent me years ago. Something about rocks and soil density. I never understood it. Too many big words. I was going to throw it in the fire, but I kept it with the deed, just in case." Brody unfolded it. I watched his pupils dilate. He wasn't reading the text about soil density. He was looking at the heat map on the second page, the one that showed a massive deep red bloom right in the center of the property line. The one labeled hydrocarbon saturation high probability. He didn't say a word. He just looked at Richard. The communication between them was silent and terrifyingly efficient. It was the language of thieves spotting an unlocked door. Brody slowly pulled his phone from his pocket, shielding it with his body so he thought I couldn't see. He snapped a picture of the map, then another of the summary page that estimated a reserve potential in the millions of barrels. He handed the paper back to me with a hand that was sweating. "Just old paperwork, huh?" Brody said, trying to keep his voice level. "Well, we'll keep it all together. For the records." Richard cleared his throat, standing up and buttoning his jacket. He looked like a man who had just won the lottery, but was trying to look somber at a funeral. "You rest now, Bernard," he said. "We will take these copies and we will look into it. We will see what we can do. We will call you in a few days." They left quickly after that. They practically ran to their car. I watched from the window as they sat in the driveway for 20 minutes, heads bent together, arguing, pointing at Brody's phone. They were already spending the money. They were already buying yachts and islands in their heads. I went back down to the bunker and waited. 3 days later, the phone rang. It was Richard. His voice was dripping with a sickly sweetness that made my skin crawl. "Bernard, my friend," he said, "we have good news. Can we come over? We want to discuss the land." I told them to come. I set the stage. I sat in my armchair, wrapped in a blanket, looking smaller and frailer than ever. When they arrived, it wasn't just Richard. It was the whole clan. Richard, Meredith, and Brody, but Harper wasn't with them. "Where is Harper?" I asked, letting my voice crack. "I wanted to see my girl. She is resting," Meredith said, quickly patting my hand. "She is so emotional about your condition, Bernard. We thought it best she stay home. We didn't want to upset her with business." "Business," I repeated. "Yes," Richard said, pulling up a wooden chair and sitting knee to knee with me. He smelled of expensive cologne and desperation. "Bernard, we have looked into the land. It is complicated. It is in a flood zone. The soil is poor. Honestly, it is a liability. If you tried to sell it on the open market, you would probably end up owing money in fees." I slumped in my chair, letting out a defeated sigh. I knew it. I knew it was worthless. "I am sorry to burden you with it." No, Richard interrupted, placing a heavy hand on my shoulder. "That is what family is for. We talked it over. Meredith, Brody, and I. We can't let you die with nothing, Bernard. We can't let Harper see her father leave this world as a pauper. So we are going to do something special for you." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a check. He held it with 2 hands as if it were a holy relic. "We are going to buy the land from you, Bernard. We are going to take the risk. We will handle the fees, the taxes, the cleanup. And we are going to give you this." He handed me the check. I looked at it. $20,000. $20,000 for a property they believed was sitting on top of $100 million in oil. It was an insult so profound, it almost made me break character and laugh in his face. But I didn't laugh. I let my hands tremble. I stared at the check as if it were a fortune. $20,000, I whispered. That is so much money." "It is," Meredith said, dabbing at her dry eyes with a tissue. "We had to move some things around. We had to make sacrifices. But we want you to have the best care, Bernard. We want you to be comfortable in your final days." "You are too kind," I said. "Too kind." Brody stepped forward, holding a clipboard with a pen attached. "Just sign here, Bernard. This transfers the deed to the Miller Trust. That protects it, you see. It keeps the government from taking it for taxes." I took the clipboard. The pen hovered over the signature line. I hesitated. "But what about Harper?" I asked. "Should she be on this? It was her mother's wish that she—" Brody's face hardened instantly. "Harper doesn't know anything about land management, Bernard. If you put her name on this, the creditors will come after her. You know she has debts. This protects her. This is for Harper." "For Harper," I repeated. Suddenly there was a noise from outside, a car door slamming, then running footsteps on the gravel. The front door flew open. It was Harper. She looked wild. Her hair was a mess, her eyes red and puffy. She wasn't resting. She had escaped. "Dad, don't sign it!" she screamed, rushing into the room. Brody spun around, his face twisting into a mask of fury. "How did you get out? I told you to stay in the room." "I climbed out the window," Harper yelled, pushing past him to get to me. She grabbed my hand, pulling the pen away from the paper. "Dad, they are lying to you. They aren't helping you. I heard them talking last night. They think there is oil. They think that land is worth millions. They are trying to steal it from you for 20 grand. The room froze. The secret was out. But Richard didn't panic. He stood up slowly, his face turning an ugly shade of purple. "Harper, you are hysterical," he said, his voice cold and menacing. "You are upsetting your father. He is dying, for God's sake. Look at him. Do you want his last memory to be you screaming like a banshee?" "I don't care," Harper cried, hugging me tight. "Dad, please, don't sell it to them. Even if it is worth nothing, don't give it to them. They are monsters. They locked me in the bedroom, Dad." They took my phone. I looked at Brody. "You locked her in a room." Brody stepped forward, grabbing Harper by the arm and yanking her away from me. "She is unstable, Bernard," he shouted. "She is having a breakdown because of your illness. We are trying to protect her." "Let me go," Harper screamed, struggling against him. "Get her out of here, Brody," Richard roared. "Take her to the car." Brody dragged my daughter toward the door. She was kicking and screaming, reaching out for me. "Dad, don't do it, please." I watched them drag her out. I watched my son-in-law manhandle my daughter. I felt a pulse in my neck that hammered like a war drum. I wanted to stand up. I wanted to drop the act, pull the gun I kept taped under the seat of my truck, and end this right there. But I couldn't. Not yet. If I stopped now, they would just find another way to hurt her. I had to finish this. I had to let them destroy themselves. Meredith was standing in front of me, blocking my view of the door. She was crying now, big, fake crocodile tears. "I am so sorry, Bernard," she sobbed. She is so sick with grief. She doesn't know what she is saying." "Oil. In a wasteland, it is a delusion. We just want to help. Please, sign the papers so we can get you to a doctor, so we can get Harper the help she needs." I looked at the check. Then I looked at the door where my daughter's screams were fading. I looked at Richard, who was straightening his tie, composing himself. "I will sign," I said, my voice dead. Richard's eyes lit up. "Thank God. It is the right thing to do," but I added, raising a finger. "The price has gone up." Richard froze. "What, you heard her," I said. "She thinks it is worth millions. If I sign this, if I give this to you, I need to know she is safe. I need to know her debts are paid." "What are you asking for?" Bernard, Richard hissed. "I want $50,000, I said. In cash. Today. And I want the deed to Harper's house. The one she mortgaged to you. I want it returned to her name. Clear and free." Richard laughed. "That is impossible. We don't have 50,000 in cash lying around. And the house? The house is collateral on a deal." "Then no deal," I said, dropping the pen. "I will let the state take the land." Richard stared at me. I could see the gears turning. He was thinking about the oil. He was thinking about the hundreds of millions he thought were buried in that Texas dirt. 50,000 was nothing compared to that. The house was nothing compared to that. He pulled out his phone. He walked to the corner of the room and made a call. I heard him shouting. I heard him begging. I heard him authorize a wire transfer from an account I knew he shouldn't be touching, the escrow account for his other investors. He was robbing Peter to pay Paul. He was leveraging everything he had and everything he didn't have. He came back 5 minutes later, sweating profusely. "It is done," he said, his voice shaking. "The cash will be here in an hour. My associate is bringing it. And I will have the lawyer draft a release for the house lien. But you sign now. You sign right now. I waited. I sat in silence for an hour while Meredith paced and Richard chewed his fingernails. When the courier arrived with a duffel bag, Richard threw it on my lap. "Count it," he spat. I opened the bag. Stacks of used hundreds. $50,000. It was likely the last liquidity they had in the world. "And the house?" I asked. Richard threw a document on the table. A release of lien, notarized. I picked up the pen. I signed the deed to the Texas land. My signature was shaky but legible. "There," I said, handing it to him. "It is yours. The oil, the rocks, everything." Richard grabbed the deed. He held it up to the light. He grinned a manic, terrifying grin. "You did the right thing, old man," he said. "You finally did something useful." Brody came back in, panting. "Harper was locked in the car," he said. "We are leaving," Richard said. "We have a plane to catch. We need to get a survey team to Texas immediately." They didn't say goodbye. They didn't ask about my health. They grabbed the deed and the future they thought it contained, and they ran. They left me alone in the cabin with $50,000 in cash and the freedom of my daughter's home. I walked to the window and watched them drive away. I picked up the phone and called Fairbanks. "They took the bait," I said. "They leveraged everything." "They are on their way to Texas," good Fairbanks said. "Fairbanks," I asked. "Yes, sir. Call the EPA. Tell them there has been unauthorized activity reported at the Superfund site in Sector 4. Tell them the new owners are en route to disturb the soil containment cap." I hung up the phone. I walked out to the truck. I had to go get my daughter out of their car. And then I had to tell her that her father wasn't just a truck driver. He was the man who just sold her tormentors a $5 million cleanup bill for the price of her freedom. The lawyer's office they had chosen was a far cry from the marble-floored firm that handled my estate planning. It was tucked into the back corner of a crumbling strip mall, sandwiched between a discount vape shop and a laundromat that smelled of bleach and despair. The sign on the frosted glass door was peeling the gold lettering flaking away to reveal the cheap adhesive underneath. Inside the carpet was a shade of brown that suggested it had once been beige, and the fluorescent lights hummed with the angry buzz of dying insects. It was fitting, really. This was where the Millers belonged. Not in the boardrooms of Chicago, but here in the grime brokering deals with money they didn't have. I sat in a folding metal chair clutching my chest, maintaining the charade of the dying man. My breath wheezed in and out, a rhythmic soundtrack to their desperation. Richard was pacing the small room, his expensive Italian loafers squeaking on the linoleum. He looked manic. His tie was loosened, his hair was disheveled, and there was a sheen of sweat on his forehead that no amount of air conditioning could dry. Meredith sat next to me, tapping her manicured nails on her designer handbag, the sound like a nervous woodpecker. Brody stood by the door guarding it, as if I might try to run, which was laughable, given that I was pretending I could barely walk. The lawyer, a man named Mr. Hyman, who wore a suit 2 sizes too big and smelled faintly of gin, placed a stack of documents on the scratched laminate table. "Here we are," Hyman said, his voice raspy. "Standard transfer of deed. Quitclaim. Mineral rights assignment. It is all boilerplate. Just need a signature right here." Richard stopped pacing. He leaned over the table, his eyes wild. "Sign it, Bernard. Let's get this over with so we can get you to a doctor." I looked at the papers. I looked at the pen Hyman was holding out to me. I didn't reach for it. Instead, I leaned back, letting out a long, dramatic cough that made Meredith recoil in disgust. "I don't know," I rasped, shaking my head slowly. "It feels rushed. My father always said never sign anything on an empty stomach, and I am worried about Harper." Brody stepped forward, his fists clenched. "We told you Harper is fine. She is safe. Just sign the damn paper, old man. I looked at Brody. I saw the violence in him, the entitlement. He thought he was intimidating me. He had no idea that the only reason he was still standing was because I needed his signature on the release forms. I won't sign, I said, my voice dropping an octave, becoming suddenly stubborn. Not until I see the money. And not until I see the paper that says Harper's house is free. Richard slammed his hand on the table. We agreed on 20,000. We will write you a check right now. A check, I repeated, letting a small senile chuckle escape my lips. A check from you, Richard. I may be old and I may be dying, but I am not stupid. I know banks. I know how checks bounce. I want cash, and I want Harper's mortgage paid off. Today. Right now. Or I walk out that door and I take the deed with me. The room went deadly silent. Hyman looked between us, sensing the tension, probably wondering if his fee was in jeopardy. Bernard Meredith said, her voice trembling with suppressed rage. That is $200,000. The mortgage is $180,000. The cash for you is $20,000. We don't carry that kind of currency. Then go get it, I said, crossing my arms over my chest. Or I keep the land. Maybe I will sell it to the state. They offered me $500 for it once. Maybe I will just take that. No, Richard shouted. The thought of losing the oil, the millions he thought were buried under that toxic soil, broke him. He looked at me with pure panic. You can't sell it to the state. It is a family asset. Then pay for it, I said. Richard grabbed Brody by the arm and dragged him into the corner of the room. They whispered furiously. I didn't need to hear the words to know what was happening. They were tapped out. The Ponzi scheme was dry. Their credit cards were maxed. They needed $200,000 in the next hour, or they lost the lottery ticket. I watched Richard pull out his phone. He hesitated. His thumb hovered over a contact. I saw him close his eyes, take a deep breath, and press dial. He wasn't calling a bank. Banks don't give you $200,000 in cash on an hour's notice without paperwork. He was calling the shadows. He was calling the kind of people who charge 50% interest a week and take collateral in kneecaps. I watched him speak, his voice low and pleading. I saw him nodding rapidly. I saw him mouth the words, yes, everything. The car, the jewelry, the rights to the new project. Yes, I swear. He hung up and turned back to me. His face was gray. He looked like a man who had just sold his soul and wasn't sure if the check would clear. It is coming, he said, his voice hollow. My associate is bringing it. But you have to sign the mortgage release now. We pay off the bank. We give you the cash and you sign the deed. Simultaneously. I nodded. That is fair. We waited. The minutes stretched into an hour. The tension in the room was suffocating. Meredith was pacing now, muttering to herself about how ungrateful I was, about how they were saving me. Brody was staring out the window, twitching. Finally, a heavy knock rattled the frosted glass. Brody opened the door. Two men walked in. They didn't look like bankers. They wore leather jackets and expressions of absolute boredom. One of them carried a heavy duffel bag. The other held a thick envelope. They ignored me. They ignored Meredith. They walked straight to Richard. Mr. Miller, the one with the bag, said, "We are here to close the transaction." Richard looked terrified. He nodded. Yes. Yes, thank you for coming so quickly. The man placed the bag on the table and unzipped it. It was filled with stacks of cash, dirty bills, street money, and the bank draft, Richard asked. The second man handed him the envelope. Certified cashier's check, made out to the mortgage lender. We verified the payoff amount. It is all there. But Mr. Miller. Yes, Richard squeaked. "The boss wants you to know. The clock starts now, 1 week, or we take the collateral. And we take other things." I knew what other things meant. Richard swallowed hard and nodded. 1 week. We will have the oil leases signed by then. We will have millions. The men didn't smile. They just stepped back and crossed their arms. Richard turned to me. He looked like he was vibrating. "Here, Bernard. Look, it is all here." He grabbed the phone and put it on speaker. He dialed the mortgage company. He navigated the automated system with shaking fingers. He authorized the payoff using the routing number on the check the loan sharks had provided. We listened to the automated voice. "Payment processed. The lien on the property at 42 Maple Drive has been released. A confirmation letter will be sent." I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. Harper's house was safe. The debt was gone. "Now the cash," Richard said, pushing the duffel bag toward me. "Count it." I reached into the bag. I pulled out a stack of hundreds. I flipped through them. Real. All real. I didn't need to count every bill. I knew these men. They didn't shortchange you on the loan. They killed you on the collection. "It looks correct," I said, zipping the bag closed. "Sign." Richard hissed. "Sign the deed." Hyman pushed the papers in front of me again. My hand hovered over the paper. I looked at Richard, at Meredith, at Brody. I saw the hunger in their eyes. They were so close to what they thought was salvation. They had mortgaged their lives, borrowed from killers, and leveraged every lie they had ever told for this moment. I picked up the pen. My hand trembled, but this time it wasn't acting. It was the adrenaline of the kill. I signed my name. Bernard Lowe. Hyman stamped the document. He notarized it. He handed the copy to Richard. Richard clutched the deed to his chest. He let out a laugh that sounded like a sob. "We did it," he whispered. "We actually did it." Meredith hugged him. "Oh, Richard, we are rich. We are going to be billionaires." Brody looked at me, a smirk forming on his face. "You did a good thing, old man. You finally stepped up. Now take your charity money and get out. We have work to do." I stood up. I grabbed the heavy duffel bag with one hand, a grip that was surprisingly strong for a dying man. I picked up the confirmation number for the mortgage release and tucked it into my pocket. I walked to the door. The two loan sharks watched me pass their eyes indifferent. They didn't care who I was. They only cared that Richard paid. I stopped at the threshold and looked back at them one last time. They were huddled around the deed, tracing the lines of the property, pointing at the forged geological map I had planted. They were celebrating. They were toasting with imaginary champagne. "Goodbye, Richard," I said. "I hope the land is everything you deserve." He didn't even look up. "Just go, Bernard. Go die somewhere quiet." I walked out into the cool evening air. I walked past the vape shop, past the laundromat, to my truck. I threw the bag of money onto the passenger seat. $200,000, the price of their souls, and the cost of their destruction. I sat in the truck for a moment, watching the door of the lawyer's office. I saw the loan sharks come out and drive away in a black SUV. Then I saw the Millers come out. They were practically skipping. They were holding that piece of paper like it was the Holy Grail. They had no idea. They didn't know that the EPA had already been notified. They didn't know that the oil they saw on the map was actually a subterranean pocket of industrial sludge that I had spent 10 years containing. They didn't know that by signing that deed, they had just assumed liability for a federal Superfund site. They hadn't just bought a worthless piece of land. They had bought a toxic waste dump that required millions of dollars in mandatory environmental maintenance. And they had borrowed money from the mob to do it. I started the engine. The rumble of the truck felt good. strong. I pulled out of the lot and headed toward the safe house where Harper was waiting. I had $50,000 in cash for her, a paid-off house, and a story that was going to change her life. The game was over. The trap had snapped shut, and the rats were already eating the cheese, not realizing it was poisoned. I drove into the night, leaving the Millers to their victory celebration. The reckoning wasn't coming in a week. It was coming the moment they put a shovel in that ground. And I intended to be watching from a safe distance when the ground finally swallowed them whole. The week that followed was the quietest of my life. It was the silence of a hunter who has set the snare and is simply waiting for the snap. I spent my days in the garden with Harper, watching the color return to her cheeks, watching her sleep without the terror of eviction hanging over her head. We didn't talk much about the Millers. We didn't have to. We both knew they were racing toward a cliff edge at 100 miles an hour, convinced they were learning to fly. I wasn't in West Texas when the hammer fell, but I might as well have been. Fairbanks had hired a private surveyor to park a mile down the road, equipped with a long-range camera and a drone. I sat in my bunker sipping black coffee, watching the live feed on the main monitor. It was like watching a slow-motion car crash, tragic and inevitable. The Millers arrived in a caravan of dusted-up rental trucks. They hadn't spared any expense, likely burning through the last of the cash they hadn't given me. They had hired a wildcat drilling crew, a roughneck outfit that didn't ask questions as long as the checks cleared. I watched Richard step out of an SUV. He was wearing a pristine white cowboy hat and a suit that looked ridiculous against the backdrop of scrub brush and red dirt. He pointed, he shouted, he gestured at the ground, as if he were commanding the earth to yield its treasures. Meredith was there too, fanning herself with a magazine, looking at the desolate landscape with a mixture of disgust and greed. Brody was running around with a clipboard, playing the part of the oil baron. They wasted no time. They were on a deadline. The loan sharks were watching the clock. Richard ordered the crew to set up on the exact coordinates marked on the forged map I had given him. The drill rig roared to life, a mechanical beast tearing into the silence of the desert. I watched the bit bore into the earth. I knew exactly what was beneath their feet. It wasn't a reservoir of crude. It was a concrete and lead containment cap sealed 20 years ago to hold back a subterranean lake of industrial runoff, heavy metals, and carcinogenic sludge. The drilling went on for an hour. I could see Richard pacing. He was checking his watch. He was making phone calls, probably boasting to his creditors that the payout was imminent. And then it happened. The drone feed showed a sudden eruption. It wasn't the black gold geyser of the movies. It was a pressurized burst of gray, foul-looking slurry. It shot into the air, spraying the rig, the trucks, and the pristine white suit of Richard Miller. Even through the silent video feed, I could imagine the smell. It would smell like rotten eggs and burning tires. It would smell like death. The drilling crew stopped immediately. They knew what that smell meant. They started backing away, shouting, covering their mouths. But Richard didn't back away. He ran toward the hole. He scooped up a handful of the sludge. He rubbed it between his fingers. I zoomed in on his face. The confusion was absolute. He was expecting viscosity. He was expecting the slick sheen of petroleum. Instead, his skin was turning red from the chemical burn. Then came the second wave, but this one didn't come from the ground. It came from the highway. 3 black SUVs with federal plates tore onto the property, followed by a hazardous materials truck. Men in suits and men in white hazmat gear swarmed the site. I had made the call to the EPA 3 days ago, reporting an unauthorized breach of a sealed Superfund site. They had been waiting too. I watched the federal agents surround the Millers. I saw the drilling foreman throwing his hands up, pointing at Richard, undoubtedly claiming he was just following orders. I saw an agent shove a Geiger counter toward the hole, then recoil. Richard was screaming. I couldn't hear the words, but I could read his body language. He was waving the deed I had signed over to him. the deed that legally made him the sole owner of one of the most toxic waste dumps in the state of Texas. He was trying to explain. He was trying to show them the map. The agent snatched the map from Richard's hand. He looked at it, then laughed. He said something to Richard that made the blood drain from the man's face. I imagined he was telling him that the map was a forgery, a child's drawing compared to the federal geological records they held. Then the agent handed Richard a citation. It wasn't a parking ticket. It was a notice of violation. I knew the statutes. Piercing a federal containment cap carried an immediate fine and the remediation costs. The mandate to reseal the site and clean the contaminated soil that started at $5 million. Richard stood there covered in toxic gray mud, holding a piece of paper that effectively ended his life. He looked at the loan shark's deadline in his mind. He looked at the $5 million fine in his hand. He looked at the dry, empty hole in the ground. And then he grabbed his chest. It wasn't theatrical this time. It wasn't the feigned weakness I had displayed in his living room. This was real. He clutched his tie as if it were strangling him. His knees buckled. He collapsed into the toxic dirt, his white hat rolling away in the dust. Meredith screamed. She fell to her knees beside him, her designer clothes soaking up the sludge. Brody stood frozen, staring at his father's convulsing body, then at the federal agents who were now calling for a medic. The feed cut out. The drone operator had seen enough, or perhaps the feds had spotted it. The screen went black. I sat in the silence of my bunker. I didn't cheer. I didn't smile. I just felt a cold sense of completion. Richard Miller had spent his life ruining others to build a facade of wealth. Now the weight of his own greed had literally crushed his heart. I walked upstairs. I poured a cup of coffee. I sat on the porch of the cabin listening to the wind in the trees. 5 minutes later, my personal cell phone began to ring. It was Brody. I looked at the screen. I let it ring. It stopped. Then it rang again immediately. I picked it up, but I didn't answer. I just watched the name flash. Brody Miller. The man who locked my daughter out of her home. The man who called me a useless old man. He sent a text. Dad, please pick up. It is a disaster. It is not oil. It is poison. The feds are here. Dad had a heart attack. They are taking him to the hospital. We are under arrest, Bernard. They say we owe millions. They say we broke federal law. You have to help us. You have to tell them it is your land. You have to take it back. Please. The investors. The people we borrowed the money from. They are calling. They said they are coming for us. I am scared. Pick up the phone. I read the words. I saw the terror in them. He wanted me to take it back. He wanted me to step in and say, oops, my mistake, and assume the liability for the environmental disaster they had caused. He wanted me to save him from the loan sharks. I deleted the message. I put the phone down on the porch railing. I looked out at the garden where Harper was picking tomatoes. She looked peaceful. She looked free. My phone rang again and again. A crescendo of panic from a man who was realizing that the safety net he thought he had, my naivety, was actually a noose. I didn't block the number. I wanted him to hear it ring. I wanted him to know that I was there on the other end, watching, listening, and choosing silence. I wanted him to understand that the old man in the denim jacket wasn't helpless. He was just done. I walked down the steps and joined my daughter in the garden. The sun was warm on my face. The air smelled of earth and growing things, not chemicals and greed. Who was that? Harper asked, looking at the phone buzzing on the railing. Nobody, I said, picking a ripe tomato and handing it to her. Just a telemarketer, selling something nobody wants. We went back inside. The phone kept ringing until the battery died. And in Texas, the sun beat down on a hole in the ground, that had swallowed the Miller dynasty whole. 30 days. It had been exactly 30 days since the black sludge erupted from the Texas earth, and Richard Miller's heart gave out under the weight of his own greed. 30 days of silence from me. 30 days of absolute terror for them. I had spent the month preparing. I wasn't just preparing a lawsuit. I was preparing a spectacle. I wanted the final blow to land not in a dark courtroom or a dusty lawyer's office, but under the crystal chandeliers of the very place where they had tried to strip me of my dignity. I sent the invitation to their temporary address, a cramped short-term rental apartment near the airport where they were hiding from the loan sharks. It wasn't a gold-embossed card like the ones I sent to the governor or the CEOs of the Fortune 500. It was a handwritten note on plain paper sealed in a cheap envelope. It read simply, "Come to the Gilded Fork, 7 p.m. Saturday. We need to settle the account. Bring the deed." I knew they would come. They had no choice. They were drowning. The EPA fines were looming like a thunderhead. The loan sharks were circling their patience, evaporating with every passing day. They probably thought I had cracked. They probably convinced themselves that the old naive truck driver was terrified of the mess he had caused and was ready to buy the land back, or perhaps offer them the rest of his savings to make the federal agents go away. They came because hope is a cruel thing to a desperate man. I arrived at the Gilded Fork 2 hours early. This time I didn't use the revolving door. I used the private entrance reserved for the owners. I didn't wear the denim jacket with the frayed collar or the work boots caked in mud. I stood in the owner's suite looking in the full-length mirror. The man staring back at me was Bernard Lowe. Not the retired recluse, but the titan. I was wearing a bespoke Brioni suit, charcoal gray, cut from wool so fine it felt like silk. It cost $12,000. My shoes were Italian leather, hand-stitched. On my wrist sat a Patek Philippe that cost more than the house Richard and Meredith had lost to bankruptcy 5 years ago. I adjusted my tie, a deep crimson silk, the color of blood, the color of war. Tonight wasn't just a dinner. It was the annual Lowe Foundation Charity Gala. It was the most exclusive ticket in Chicago. Every year, I gathered the city's elite to raise millions for environmental cleanup and urban renewal. Usually, I stayed in the shadows, letting my board members take the stage. But tonight was different. Tonight, I was the main event. By 7 o'clock, the ballroom of the Gilded Fork was a sea of tuxedos and designer gowns. The air hummed with the quiet, confident conversation of people who move markets. Senators were drinking scotch with tech moguls. Philanthropists were discussing grants with city planners. The room smelled of expensive perfume-aged mahogany and power. I stood backstage watching the monitors. The security feed showed the front entrance. And there they were. They looked like ghosts of the people who had sat at table 4 a month ago. Richard was in a wheelchair, his face gray and slack on the left side, the aftermath of the stroke that had followed his heart attack in the desert. He was wearing a suit that hung loosely on his frame, the fabric wrinkled. Meredith was pushing him. Her fur coat looked tired, matted in places, and her makeup was applied with a heavy hand, trying to cover the dark circles of sleepless nights. Brody walked beside them. He looked twitchy, his eyes darting around the lobby like a cornered animal. He wasn't wearing a suit. He was wearing slacks and a blazer that didn't match his shirt unbuttoned at the collar. I watched them argue with the security team at the door. I had left strict instructions. The head of security, a massive man named Stone who had been with me for 20 years, nodded at them. He didn't check their names against the VIP list. He simply unhooked the velvet rope and gestured for them to enter. They walked in, blinking against the brilliance of the chandeliers. They were confused. They had expected a quiet table in the corner where they could bully an old man. Instead, they had walked into the center of high society. I watched Meredith's eyes widen. She saw the jewelry on the women. She saw the faces she recognized from the society pages she obsessively read. She gripped the handles of Richard's wheelchair tighter. They didn't understand. They thought perhaps I worked here. Maybe I was a janitor. Maybe I was washing dishes in the back to pay off my debts. They scanned the room looking for the denim jacket, looking for the victim. They huddled near the entrance, afraid to move further into the room. A waiter passed them with a tray of champagne. Brody reached for a glass, his hand shaking, but the waiter deftly stepped around him, sensing that these three didn't belong. It was time. The lights in the ballroom dimmed. The conversation died down, replaced by a hush of anticipation. A spotlight hit the stage. The master of ceremonies, the mayor of Chicago, stepped up to the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," he boomed, his voice echoing through the hall. "Thank you for joining us tonight. We are here to celebrate 20 years of excellence, 20 years of rebuilding our city." Usually, the man behind this foundation prefers to remain anonymous. He prefers to let his work speak for itself. But tonight, given the extraordinary success of our latest environmental initiative in Texas, he has agreed to step out of the shadows. The Millers froze. I saw Richard's head snap up. I saw Brody stop breathing. Texas. The word hung in the air like a guillotine blade. "Please welcome," the mayor continued, raising a hand toward the curtain, "the founder of Lowe Logistics, the architect of the Global Supply Chain Initiative, and the chairman of the Lowe Foundation, Mr. Bernard Lowe." The curtain swept back. I walked out. I didn't shuffle. I didn't stoop. I walked with the stride of a man who owns the ground beneath his feet. The spotlight caught the sheen of my suit, the glint of the watch, the steel in my gray hair. I stood center stage, tall and imposing, my hands clasped behind my back. The room erupted. 300 of the most powerful people in the country stood up. The applause was a physical force, a wave of sound that crashed against the stage. They cheered. They whistled. They honored the legend they knew. But I didn't look at them. I looked past the senators. I looked past the billionaires. I looked straight to the back of the room near the kitchen doors, where 3 small, terrified people stood frozen in the darkness. I locked eyes with Brody. His mouth fell open. He looked from me to the screen behind me, which was displaying the Lowe Logistics logo, a logo he saw on trucks every day on the highway, a logo he probably sold software to in his miserable little job. He looked at the suit. He looked at the man he had called a peasant. The color drained from his face so fast, he looked like a corpse standing upright. Meredith let out a small shriek, her hand flying to her throat. She stumbled back, bumping into Richard's wheelchair. And Richard stared at me with the eyes of a man seeing his own executioner. He tried to speak, but his mouth just worked silently. He gripped the armrests of his chair, trying to push himself up, trying to flee, but his body wouldn't obey. I raised a hand, and the applause died down instantly. The silence that followed was absolute. "Thank you," I said into the microphone. My voice was deep, resonant, the voice of authority. It wasn't the raspy wheeze of the dying man in the cabin. It was the voice that had commanded fleets of ships and armies of workers. "We are here tonight to talk about waste," I continued, my eyes never leaving the Millers. "We are here to talk about toxicity, about things that poison our soil and our society. For years, my company has specialized in cleaning up messes. We take the things that no one wants, the hazardous materials, the garbage, and we contain them. We make sure they can't hurt anyone else." I paused, letting the words sink in. Recently, I encountered a particularly nasty pocket of toxicity. It wasn't in the ground. It was in my own backyard. It was a toxicity born of greed, of arrogance, of people who believe that appearances are everything and character is nothing. The room was wrapped. They thought I was speaking metaphorically. Only the 3 people by the door knew I was speaking literally. I stepped closer to the edge of the stage. The spotlight followed me. There are people in this world who mistake kindness for weakness. I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous growl. People who see a simple man and assume he is a simpleton. They look at a pair of work boots and see poverty when they should see the foundation of an empire. They try to steal. They try to cheat. They try to take what isn't theirs because they are hollow inside. They mortgage their souls for a Bentley and a seat at a table they didn't earn. Brody took a step back. He bumped into a waiter, sending a tray of glasses crashing to the floor. The sound shattered the tension. Every head in the room turned. The spotlight operator, sensing the drama, swung the beam of light away from me and onto the back of the room. It hit them. Brody Meredith and Richard were suddenly illuminated in blinding white light. They were exposed. The crowd gasped. They saw the wheelchair, the disheveled clothes, the look of sheer animalistic terror on their faces. I pointed at them. My finger was like a loaded gun. "Tonight," I said, my voice booming, "we are going to settle an account. Security," I commanded. "Bring them to the stage." Stone and 3 other guards materialized from the shadows. They didn't ask. They didn't hesitate. They grabbed Brody by the arms. He tried to pull away, but he was a child in the grip of giants. They took the handles of Richard's wheelchair. They took Meredith by the elbow. They marched them through the center of the ballroom. The crowd parted like the Red Sea. The whispers started. Who are they? What is happening? Is this part of the show? It was the longest walk of their lives. I watched them come closer. I saw the sweat dripping down Brody's nose. I saw the tears streaking Meredith's heavy makeup. I saw the utter defeat in Richard's eyes. They were lifted onto the stage. The guards placed them in a line center stage beneath the massive screen. They looked small. They looked pathetic. They looked exactly like what they were. I walked over to them. I stood in front of Brody. He was trembling so hard, his teeth were chattering. "Hello, Brody," I said softly. The microphone picked up every nuance. "Bernard. Mr. Lowe." Brody stammered. We didn't know. We thought—" "You thought I was trash," I said. "You thought I was a stepping stone. You thought you could lock my daughter out of her home and use me to pay your gambling debts." The crowd murmured. The word gambling rippled through the room. "And you, Richard," I said, turning to the man in the chair, "the great developer, the man who deals in millions." Richard couldn't look at me. He stared at his knees. I pulled a document from my inside pocket. It wasn't the deed to the Texas land. It was a purchase agreement. "I did some shopping this week," I said, holding the paper up to the light. "I didn't buy a resort in the Maldives. I bought debt." I turned to the audience. "Ladies and gentlemen, these people owe a lot of money. They owe the federal government $5 million for environmental damages to a site they purchased in bad faith. They owe $180,000 to a predatory lender in Chicago for a cash loan they took out to defraud a dying man. And they owe tens of thousands to various credit card companies and banks." I looked back at Richard. "I bought it all, Richard. I bought the note from the loan sharks. I paid them 50 cents on the dollar. They were happy to get it. I bought the judgment from the bankruptcy court in Florida. I bought the lien on your Bentley." I leaned in close, so close I could smell the fear on him. "I own your debt. I own your car. I own the clothes on your back. I own you." Meredith let out a sob and collapsed to her knees on the stage. "Oh God, please. Bernard. We are family." "Family?" I asked, my voice rising. "You treated me like a disease. You wiped the chair after I sat in it. You laughed when I counted pennies to help you. You are not family. You are a bad investment, and I am liquidating the asset." I signaled to the tech booth. "Put it on the screen." The giant screen behind me changed. It wasn't a graph of profits. It was the video Meredith had taken at the restaurant. The video of me counting the crumpled dollar bills. The video of Brody sweeping the money off the table. The audio played over the speakers loud and clear. "I don't want your garbage money, old man. You are pathetic." The crowd watched in stunned silence. They saw the cruelty. They saw the arrogance. And then they looked at the man in the Brioni suit standing next to the cowards on screen. When the video ended, the silence was absolute. "That was a month ago," I said. "Tonight the balance is due." I turned to Brody. "You called me a peasant, Brody. You said I had a poverty mindset. Well, let me give you a lesson in economics. The man with the gold makes the rules. And right now you don't have any gold. You don't have a home. You don't have a job. I bought the software company you work for this morning, and you are fired effective immediately." Brody fell to his knees beside his mother. He was weeping openly now. "Please," he begged. "Please, Dad. I'll do anything. Anything I asked. Yes, anything." I looked at the crowd. I looked at the Millers kneeling in their ruin. "Good," I said, "because the cleanup in Texas is going to be expensive, and I believe in manual labor. It builds character." I turned my back on them and walked to the podium. "Security," I said, "get this trash off my stage." The applause started slowly, one pair of hands, then another. Then it grew. It wasn't polite applause this time. It was a roar of approval. It was the sound of justice being served cold and hard. As the guards dragged the screaming, crying Millers off the stage and out the back exit, I adjusted my tie, looked out at the sea of faces, and smiled. Now I said, "Who is hungry?" The guards did not treat them gently, as they positioned the three of them like mannequins in a shop window of shame. Brody was forced to his knees, his expensive slacks tearing on the stage floor. Meredith was weeping, her mascara creating black rivers down her face, ruining the facade of the high society matriarch she had spent a lifetime constructing. Richard sat in his wheelchair, slumped over, unable to lift his head to meet the gaze of the hundreds of people staring at him. These were the titans of industry. These were the people the Millers had desperately tried to impress, the people they had emulated with rented cars and stolen money. Now they were on display, not as peers, but as parasites. I walked to the side of the stage, the microphone heavy and cold in my hand. I didn't need to shout. The acoustics of the room carried my whisper to the back rows. "You wanted to be seen," I said, looking down at them. "You spent your whole lives trying to get into this room. You stole my daughter's home to buy the costumes for this performance. So let's give the audience what they came for. Let's show them exactly who the Miller family is." I pressed the button on the remote in my pocket. The massive LED screen behind me, usually reserved for displaying charitable milestones and heartwarming videos of rescued wetlands, flickered. The logo of Low Logistics vanished. In its place, a spreadsheet appeared. It was high definition, magnified, so that even the people in the balcony could read the red ink. "This," I said, gesturing to the screen, "is the ledger of Brody Miller." The crowd murmured. On the screen were hundreds of lines of transactions. "You told my daughter you were investing in the future." I continued, my voice steady. "You told her you needed liquidity for a land deal. But the blockchain doesn't lie, Brody." I highlighted a section. $50,000 to an offshore gambling site in Malta. $20,000 to a crypto pump and dump scheme run out of a basement in Shenzhen. $15,000 for bottle service at a club in Miami while your wife was at home eating instant noodles because you had cut off her allowance. Brody sobbed, covering his face with his hands. "No," he moaned into his palms. "Please stop." I didn't stop. I clicked the remote again. "And this," I said, as the screen changed to a series of mugshots and legal documents, "is the legacy of Richard and Meredith Miller." The room gasped. On the screen were the bankruptcy filings from Florida, the fraud indictments, the list of elderly victims who had lost their pensions to the Miller Horizon Group. "They call themselves developers," I told the crowd. "But in the industry we have a different word for it. Predatory. They target the weak. They target the trusting. They target the naive. They built a life of luxury on the backs of retirees who can no longer afford their medication." Richard made a guttural sound, a wheeze of protest that died in his throat. But the worst crime, I said, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous register, wasn't the money. Money is just paper. You can print more of it. The worst crime was what you did to my family. I signaled the sound booth. The audio recording began to play. It was crystal clear, captured by the high-fidelity microphones Fairbanks had installed in the cabin during the negotiation. The voice of Meredith filled the ballroom, shrill and cruel. "She is just a stepping stone, Brody. Once we get the deed, we dump her. She is dead weight, just like her father. He is a useless old peasant. We take the land, we put him in a state home, and we let him rot." The silence in the ballroom was deafening. It was a physical weight. I saw the wife of a senator cover her mouth in horror. I saw a tech billionaire shake his head in disgust. They had heard enough. They had seen the soul of the people on stage, and it was black. I clicked the remote one last time. The screen went black. I walked to the center of the stage, standing over the Millers. They were huddled together, a pile of broken vanity and fear. "You thought you were playing a game with a senile old man," I said. "You thought I was the mark. But you forgot the first rule of business. Always know who holds the debt." I reached into the inside pocket of my jacket. I pulled out a thick, bound document. I held it up. "You borrowed money to buy that land in Texas," I said. "You went to the sharks. You went to the street lenders who charge interest in blood. You borrowed $180,000. Richard nodded weakly, tears streaming down his face. "And you owe the banks," I continued. "You have 3 mortgages on a house you don't own. You have 7 credit cards maxed out to the limit. You have a car lease you haven't paid in 3 months. I dropped the document on the floor in front of them. It landed with a heavy thud. "I bought it," I said. Brody looked up, and his eyes red and swollen. "What I bought it all," I declared, my voice booming. "I went to your loan sharks this morning. I offered them 50 cents on the dollar for your note. They were happy to take it. They didn't want to break your legs, Brody. It's bad for business. They just wanted their cash. So I paid them." I took a step closer. "I went to the banks. I bought the distressed debt portfolios that held your names. I bought the judgment liens from Florida. I bought the paper on your car." I leaned down, getting right in Brody's face. "I own your debt," I whispered loud enough for the microphone to catch. "I own the shirt on your back. I own the watch on your wrist. I own the air you are breathing right now." I stood up and turned to the audience. "The total is $3,200,000, I announced. "That is what these people owe. And as of this morning, I am their sole creditor. There are no more banks. There are no more sharks. There is only me." The crowd erupted. It wasn't applause this time. It was a low roar of shock and awe. They were witnessing a hostile takeover of a human life. "You have 24 hours, I said to the Millers, not looking at them anymore. 24 hours to vacate the rental. 24 hours to return the car. And then we are going to discuss a payment plan." I turned back to them one last time. "You said I had a poverty mindset, Brody. You said I was a peasant. Well, congratulations. You are about to find out what it is really like to work for a living. Because you are going to work off every single cent of that $3 million. If it takes you the rest of your lives, you will pay me back." I signaled to Stone. "Get them out of my sight." As the guards dragged them away, their wails of despair echoing through the hall, I didn't feel joy. I felt balance. The scales had tipped. The ledger was corrected. And the peasant had become the king. The guards paused. They dragged Brody back to the center of the stage. He was a mess of snot and tears, his expensive blazer torn at the shoulder. He looked up at me, hope flickering in his eyes, pathetic and weak. He thought I was going to show mercy. He thought the old man in the denim jacket was still in there somewhere, soft and forgiving. But I wasn't looking at him. I was looking at my daughter. Harper walked out from the wings of the stage. She wasn't wearing the designer dress Brody had forced her to buy on credit. She was wearing a simple black dress she had owned for years. Her face was scrubbed clean of makeup. She looked pale, but she stood tall. Her spine was steel. She didn't look at the crowd. She looked only at the man who had locked her out of her own home. "Brody," she said, her voice amplified by the silence of the room. Harper, Brody sobbed, reaching out a hand. "Baby, tell him. Tell him we are a team. Tell him to stop this. We can fix it. I love you." Harper didn't flinch. She reached into her purse and pulled out a manila envelope. It wasn't thick. It didn't need to be. "I filed these this morning," she said, tossing the envelope at his knees. "Divorce papers. Incompatibility is the legal term, but the reality is that I don't stay married to monsters." Brody stared at the envelope. "No," he whispered. "You can't." "I already did," she said, "and I am taking back my name. I am Alo. I am my father's daughter, and I am done paying for your mistakes." She turned to me. She didn't smile, but her eyes were clear. She nodded once, then walked off the stage, leaving her husband kneeling in the wreckage of his life. I turned to Fairbanks, who was standing in the shadows with his tablet, recording everything. "Fairbanks," I said, "execute the asset seizure on Richard and Meredith." "Yes, sir," Fairbanks replied, stepping into the light. "We have already secured the court orders. We are seizing the rental apartment contents, the remaining jewelry, and the leased vehicles. Every penny will go into a restitution fund for the elderly victims of their Ponzi scheme. They will leave Chicago with nothing but the clothes on their backs." "And him?" I asked, pointing at Brody. Fairbanks adjusted his glasses. "He has outstanding warrants for wire fraud and illegal gambling. The federal prison sentence would likely be 15 to 20 years. Brody wailed. He curled into a ball on the stage floor. "Please, no, I can't go to prison. I'll die in there." I stepped closer to him. I nudged his leg with the toe of my Italian leather shoe. "There is another option," I said. Brody looked up, desperate. "Anything. I'll do anything." "I bought your debt," I reminded him. "I own you. And I have a lot of warehouses. Big, hot, dusty warehouses where boxes need to be moved, where trucks need to be loaded, where the work is hard and the hours are long." I leaned down. "You have a choice, Brody. You can go to federal prison, or you can work for me. You will work in my distribution center in Gary, Indiana. You will work the night shift. You will load trucks. You will sweep floors. You will earn minimum wage, and every single cent of it will be garnished to pay back the debt you owe me. By my calculations, if you work 6 days a week, 12 hours a day, you should be free and clear in about 10 years. 10 years, Brody choked out. Manual labor. It is honest work, I said, my voice cold. It is the kind of work you mocked. It is the kind of work you said was beneath you. I stood up and buttoned my jacket. You laughed at me for being poor, Brody. You laughed at a man you thought had nothing. Well, now you are going to learn. You are going to learn what it feels like to count every penny. You are going to learn what it feels like to ache in your bones after a shift. You are going to learn what real poverty tastes like. I signaled the guards. Get him out of here. He starts Monday. They dragged him away. He didn't scream this time. He just hung his head broken. The crowd stayed silent for a long moment, and then slowly they began to clap. It wasn't a celebration. It was a recognition. Justice had been served not with a gavel, but with a balance sheet. 1 week later, the roar of jet engines filled my ears. I sat in the cream leather seat of my Gulfstream looking out the window as the runway blurred beneath us. Chicago was falling away, shrinking into a grid of lights and concrete. Across the aisle, Harper sat quietly. She was looking at the clouds. She looked different. The anxiety that had vibrated off her for years was gone, replaced by a quiet, somber calm. She was free. Her debt was paid. Her house was hers again. But she was starting over from zero. She looked at me. "Dad," she said softly. "Yes, sweetheart." "Where are we going?" "We are going to headquarters," I said. "In Seattle." She nodded, fiddling with the strap of her seatbelt. "Dad, I don't know how to thank you. For the 50,000. For the house, for saving me." I turned my chair to face her. I set down my coffee cup. "Harper," I said seriously, "I saved you from the shark, but I am not going to carry you to the shore." She looked confused. "What do you mean?" "I mean that the $50,000 was a bailout," I said. "It was necessary to stop the bleeding. But that is the last check I am ever going to write for you." Her eyes widened slightly. I saw a flash of the old fear, the insecurity of a woman who had been told she was useless for years. "I don't understand," she stammered. "I thought, now that I know you have money." "You thought I would give it to you?" I asked. "You thought you would live the life Brody wanted, the life of leisure." "No, I just—" "Harper," I said, leaning forward. "Money is a tool. If you don't know how to use it, it will cut you. You saw what it did to the Millers. They chased it, they worshipped it, and it destroyed them because they didn't earn it. They didn't understand the value of the work that creates it." I pulled a folder from my briefcase and slid it across the table to her. She opened it. It wasn't a check. It was an employment contract. "What is this?" she asked. "It is an internship," I said. "Junior logistics coordinator. You start at the bottom. You will track shipments. You will handle customer complaints. You will learn how a supply chain works from the ground up. The pay is modest. You will have to budget. You will have to work hard." She stared at the paper. "I built an empire, Harper," I said, "and I am going to leave it to you one day. But not yet. Not until you know how to build it yourself. I am not going to give you money. I am going to give you something much more valuable. I am going to teach you how to make it." I watched her face. I watched the realization sink in. She wasn't being rescued. She was being empowered. She wasn't a princess being handed a kingdom. She was a soldier being handed a sword. A slow smile spread across her face. It was the first genuine smile I had seen in years. It was the smile of the little girl who used to climb apple trees. "Okay," she said. She picked up the pen from the table. "Okay, Dad. When do I start?" "Right now," I said, pointing to the stack of reports on the seat next to her. "Read those. We land in 4 hours. I expect a summary of our Asian shipping routes by the time we hit the tarmac." She laughed. She actually laughed. She opened the first report and started reading. I leaned back in my seat and closed my eyes. The hum of the jet was a lullaby. The war was over. The Millers were a memory, a cautionary tale fading in the rearview mirror. My daughter was safe. Not because I had bought her safety, but because I was teaching her how to secure it for herself. I had played the poor man. I had played the dying man. But this, being the father who taught his daughter the value of her own strength, this was the role I was born to play. And as the plane climbed higher into the blue, I knew that for the first time in a long time, everything was exactly as it should be. The ledger was balanced, and the future was open for business. Did you enjoy this story of justice served cold? If you did, please support the channel by hitting the super thanks button. It helps us create more stories like this one. And tell me in the comments, what would you have done in my shoes? Would you have been harsher? Would you have forgiven them? I read every comment, and I want to know what you think. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories of revenge, redemption, and the truth coming to light. See you in the next video.